Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Toma Todito Boxing Show. Let's dive into this past Friday's event that took place out in Norfolk, Virginia, with local hometown hero Keyshawn Davis, who headlined his very first event put on by Top Rank Promotions in front of his home crowd. The former Olympian silver medalist Keyshawn Davis, along with his brothers, put on an entertaining card, and Keyshawn Davis, by far, in my opinion, stole the night with his performance over Gustavo Lemos. There's another young lightweight who's making a lot of noise in that division, and that's Abdullah Mason, and he was featured on this very same card, and he was in a complete back and forth exchange, back and forth firefight himself, where he gets dropped twice, and this is the very same division that they're both campaigning at. Abdullah Mason and Keyshawn Davis are in different points of their careers, but Abdullah Mason is putting on some really, really good victories together, and very, very impressive himself with his performance, because he showed a lot of grit, a lot of chin, a lot of heart, and he was tested. 2 flash knockdowns. It shows that you could get to him. It shows that you could that you could hurt Abdullah Mason, or at least catch him off guard and hurt him enough to where you could drop him, even though he bounced back, answered the call, and eventually ends up coming back to stop his opponent, and Johan Vasquez, Dominican fighter Johan Vasquez, a very experienced fighter who is stepping into the ring for the 32nd time in his professional career. 21 knockouts out of his 26 victories. In Johan Vasquez, and Abdullah Mason himself putting on a really, really impressive record now. Now he moves on to 16-0 with 14 knockouts, and stopped Johan Vasquez in the second round. It was a complete exchange of power and a toe-to-toe fight that favored Johan Vasquez, and he needed to muddy it up and try to make it a grittier fight, because Abdullah Mason has such good footwork and good pedigree and good hand speed, where he could have made this an easy boxing affair for himself. So Johan Vasquez decided to close in and make it an exchange, a firefight, where he found success. He drops Abdullah Mason down, drops him twice in round 1. Vasquez goes down himself in the very same round, and then goes down in the second round, where eventually the referee deems it's enough and the fight is brought to an end. 4 knockdowns in 2 rounds, and could definitely throw its hat in there for maybe performance or fight of the year, because it was an entertaining fight that these guys had between them. Johan Vasquez being the veteran, Abdullah Mason answering the call as the young prospect, and he should be prospect of the year, at least definitely in consideration. Somebody else who should be considered for prospect of the year, in my opinion, would be Floyd Schofield, and just a week prior, he was actually headlining his own card out in Las Vegas against Tejas Giron, and he found himself in a very similar showdown as Abdullah Mason did, except this one went all 12 rounds, where Schofield gets hurt several times. As initially, I believe it was around the round 4, round 5, where he gets hit, and it looks like it's just behind the ear, and he loses his footing, loses his equilibrium, and was on the verge of getting stopped, getting dropped and stopped. Floyd Schofield answered the call, just basically bit down on that mouth guard, and took the fight to Tejas Giron, and it looked like he was going to stop Giron in multiple occasions, and the Mexican fighter just refused to give way, refused to quit. There was no quit in him. He was going to have to be carried out on that night, and kept coming at Floyd, and Floyd ended up getting his hand raised in the end. It was a fight that had the people on their feet. I happened to be live at that fight, and all that kept going through my mind was Floyd Schofield is right there. He's knocking on the door of these contenders as a blue chip prospect right now. And here's Abdullah Mason, putting on a great performance himself and making a great argument for himself as a potential prospect of the year. Both of them are in similar stages of their career. Floyd Schofield's calling out Tank, calling out Shakur, calling out Keyshawn Davis. We move on to Keyshawn Davis and the performance that he just put on with Gustavo Lemos as he stops Lemos, the previously unbeaten fighter before his last bout, in which he lost a decision or dropped a decision to Richardson Hitchens. That was for an IBF title eliminator. Gustavo Lemos is on the wrong end of the decision. Hitchens gets his hand raised, remains undefeated, and is now getting his title shot against none other than Liam Perro. That fight's going to happen out in Puerto Rico sometime early December, and Liam Perro putting his title on the line against the highly regarded fighter in Richardson Hitchens. However, Richardson Hitchens got hit, got hurt, took everything that Gustavo Lemos had, and it went all the way to a decision. That was fought at 140 pounds. This is at 135 where Gustavo Lemos comes down. There was some weight issues there, but the fight went on. And Keyshawn Davis discards him in 2 rounds. Just picks him apart, looked in control, never looked in danger, looked like he was having fun. And to his own acknowledgement, he thought he was going to be in there and have a rough night, or at least have a rough go and a lot more of a tougher test. And on paper, this looked like by far the toughest test for Keyshawn Davis. And he passed it with flying colors. The businessman remains undefeated and put on a hell of a show in front of his crowd, as it should have been. These homecomings could sometimes backfire. And we just mentioned Liam Perro. Well, when Subriel Matias went back to Puerto Rico to put his title on the line against Liam Perro in his big homecoming event and his big coming out party to the boxing world, he came out flat. He came out a subpar version of himself. And Liam Perro ends up getting his hand raised in the end and takes the title from Subriel Matias in front of his home crowd, handing him a loss, handing him the second loss to his career. And Subriel Matias looked horrible. Keyshawn Davis answered the call beautifully and announced himself. It reminded me a lot of when Terrence Crawford had his first big event in front of the Omaha crowd, and they came out in numbers to support the Nebraska native, and Terrence Crawford became a star. Well, Keyshawn Davis, former Olympian, former amateur standout, has a long-standing rivalry with Cuban fighter Andy Cruz. They ran into each other 4 times in 4 different finals. In the very last one in 2020 at the Olympics, where many thought Keyshawn Davis did enough to have won that fight. Andy Cruz got awarded the gold medal. Keyshawn walks away with the silver. They both turned pro. And now they've been going back and forth exchanging barbs with one another. Andy Cruz promoted by PBC. And that's a fight that everybody's hoping to make. But because of the promotional differences, it doesn't look like it'll be made anytime soon. Meanwhile, Keyshawn's calling out for the top dogs already. Shakur calling out for Gervonta specifically, and not acknowledging Floyd Schofield or anybody else. Maybe rightfully so. Floyd Schofield, in my opinion, is knocking on the door of the contenders, but he's still maybe 1 or 2 fights away from being legitimized as a top dog contender, especially after the tough fight that he had with Tejas Giron. He came out victorious. He remains undefeated. But to many, it was a fight that, although he remains on the winning column, it was a fight that he should have won easily. Based on resumes, based on paper. But of course, styles make fights, can complicate fights. And this was the case with Floyd Schofield. He ended up running into a fighter that was that was not going to take a loss, that was not there to just collect a paycheck. And the fans ended up winning in the end because it was one of the most entertaining fights of the year so far. Abdullah Mason had a tough test in front of him with a veteran and a very experienced veteran in Johan Vasquez, and Abdullah Mason stops him in the second round. That's what a lot of people expected of Floyd Schofield. Nonetheless, Schofield remains undefeated, and he's pretty much on the same trajectory as Abdullah Mason right now, where if those two fighters ended up facing against one another, the loser would end up experiencing a big wrench in their path. Of course, depending on how they take the loss. If it's a decision loss, a highly contested fight, a controversial loss, or if it's just a routing like we saw, which is bound to happen with those two fast-footed, fast-handed, good power fighters like Floyd Schofield and Abdullah Mason. It would be a you pick 'em type fight, and more than likely there would be knockdowns, and one, if not both, getting hurt. Keyshawn Davis is in a little bit different level, and he's knocking on the door of the greats of the lightweights, of the current lightweights right now. You have 4 champions right now. You have Gervonta for the WBA. You have Shakur for the WBC. You have Loma for the IBF. And Baranchyk, Denis Baranchyk for the WBO. He collected the vacant title with his victory earlier this year over Emmanuel Navarrete, has yet to defend it. Then you have William Cepeda, who's knocking on the door of Shakur Stevenson. That fight's supposed to happen. Didn't happen. Shakur ended up with a surgery, and now it looks like William Cepeda is, not that it looks, he is scheduled to fight next week. He will be out in Riyadh fighting Tevin Farmer. Tevin Farmer, his last fight was against Raymond Murataya, and he made Raymond Murataya look not very good. Murataya had 2 or 3 fights already where he didn't look as good and as dominant as he had in the earlier portion of his career. He didn't look very good against Nakatila. Didn't look very convincing against Tevin Farmer. But then he just had a recent fight. And let me find Murataya, because he actually just came out with a statement victory on the undercard of Oshaki Foster and Consensao in that rematch. And that was the very same night as Floyd Schofield was out in Vegas. That fight was happening out in New York, where Oshaki Foster regains his title and avenges the loss that he suffered at the hands of Consensao a few months back, where everybody claimed that it was a robbery. Well, Oshaki Foster, the headliner, regains his title and regains his position as the WBC champ at 130 pounds. Raymond Murataya was on the undercard. He remains undefeated, 22-0, 17 knockouts, and he answered the call. He answered the critics, people saying, and you just heard me say it, he had looked flat. He was not looking like the dominant self that we had grown accustomed to seeing for a large portion of his career. His fights with Endogeni, his fight with Tevin Farmer, and his fight with Jeremiah Nakatila were not his best performances, even though he does knock out Nakatila in the second round. The fact that he's getting hit, they're finding openings on Raymond Murataya, is what was creating these narratives. Then he gets a tough fight against Diego Torres Nunez, but he stops him. Then he goes all the way with Endogeni. Solisani Endogeni, it was a fight that depleted the energy from the crowd that night. But Murataya got his hand raised in the end and won a 10-round unanimous decision. He then has another fight, which was a long, drawn-out fight against Tevin Farmer. But Tevin Farmer has that style that makes any style look bad and complicates things in the ring, with his gloves down by his hips or by his waist side, and moves around, gets on his bicycle, pot shots, exchanges here and there, but it's a chase. And those fights don't let Murataya look very good. And on the undercard of Oshaki Foster a week ago, he ends up routing Jesus Antonio Perez Campos in 2 rounds, discards him, put a beating on him, and announces himself that he's ready for Lomachenko, he's ready for Shakur, for Keyshawn, he's ready for anybody with that type of performance. He's almost one of those fighters that is being forgotten about. That should be an easy fight for Keyshawn Davis and Murataya to make. Both top-ranked fighters, both knocking on the door of Lomachenko. Murataya cements himself as a top contender. I've always wanted to see William Cepeda and Raymond Murataya to see how that fight would play out. That would be a very interesting showdown for me. I also would like to see Keyshawn Davis fight a taller, rangier fighter who would outshine him in the reach and power departments. He passed the test with Pedraza, Keyshawn did, and now he passed the test with Lemos with flying colors, a shorter fighter who's a power puncher. Barely got hit. So a Raymond Murataya would pose a really big threat and a really big test, in my opinion, for Keyshawn Davis. And in my opinion, that should be the next fight. Raymond Murataya undefeated against Keyshawn Davis. If Keyshawn Davis is at that level where he's calling out Tank, he's calling out Shakur, he's calling out Loma, he wants a title shot, he needs to eliminate the top opponent standing in his way, or the top contender, title contender standing in his way, making a claim that they are more deserving at a title shot than Keyshawn. I think that should be like a playoff, and the winner would definitely get a shot at Lomachenko should he decide to return and not retire. If he retires, Keyshawn versus Murataya would be an ideal fight for the vacant title. But that's still on the fence. And don't forget about Tevin Farmer, who's about to fight William Cepeda. I think William Cepeda and Tevin Farmer is a really, really good fight. Tevin Farmer thought that he got robbed against Raymond Murataya, that he deserved the victory, that it was such a close fight that he deserved the victory on that one, and he came out complaining. Maybe he needed to do a little bit more. Who knows? But Murataya got his hand raised, remains undefeated, and has now come back in great fashion, routing Perez Campos. So if William Cepeda and Tevin Farmer are engaging in that fight, both high-quality fighters, William Cepeda seems to be the number one ranked on all 4 organizations right now. If he doesn't get a shot at Lomachenko or Tank, he doesn't get a shot at Shakur, and he's going to be sitting around waiting. That would be the ideal fight to make. Cepeda, should he be victorious over Tevin Farmer, Keyshawn should be fighting Murataya in a playoff type setting, and the winners would face off against each other in the likely case that Lomachenko vacates his IBF title. Loma's looking for that one big payday. There was a lot of talks in the summer that Gervonta Loma were in conversations for a potential November showdown. Then it looked like Gervonta Shakur were in conversations for a potential November showdown. Here we are in November. Neither one of those is realistic, or neither one of them came to fruition. And now recent rumors that Lomachenko may be looking at retirement. And if that title becomes available, I think everybody in the boxing world is going to be in agreement that William Cepeda should be on one of those corners competing for any of these 4 titles that become available. If he's not going to get a shot at a champion, he definitely deserves to be fighting for a vacant title. De La Hoya had mentioned that Cepeda was going to go overseas and fight Baranchyk. That never happened. Here he is fighting Tevin Farmer. So Keyshawn Davis, who just headlined his first event, who packed the house in Norfolk, Virginia, who remains undefeated, is knocking on the door of all these champions, is positioning himself as one of the top dogs, as is Raymond Murataya for top rank. I really believe that's the next fight to make. Murataya and Keyshawn Davis. Meanwhile, let the young guys that are making a name for themselves, let them continue carving their path, like Floyd Schofield, like Abdullah Mason. There was another young prospect in Alan Garcia, Kid Kansas, who got knocked out on the undercard of Munguia, and it looks like he just got lazy, like he just got complacent. It was a one-sided fight that he was headed for a decision, and he got complacent, and he got caught, and he got knocked out, and now his plans got derailed. A blue chip prospect like Alan Garcia, who had all the upside and all the talent in the world, everything looks like, if you go watch those replays and you go watch that fight, he got complacent. Dropped his guard, got caught off guard, got knocked out. And now that's a huge wrench for him that he's going to have to get back into building himself into contendership, into consideration as a contender. So he just derailed his plans because he was already right there knocking on the door of a big fight. They called him, he answered. They needed him to fight, he would fight. This was the 4th or 5th fight for him this year. Floyd Schofield, Abdullah Mason are right there. Keyshawn Davis is a step up, and I put Keyshawn Davis on the same level as Raymond Murataya right now. That's a fight that I want to see. And I think it'll be an easy fight for them to make, and it would be a huge event. Keyshawn against Raymond Murataya. You're looking, aside from the 4 champions that we're talking about, all the other lightweights that are making noise right now, that division is stacked similar to the 154-pound division. Aside from the top 4, we've mentioned Murataya and Keyshawn, who seem to be the strongest contenders in my opinion, and William Cepeda. Those 3 are the top that could get into a title fight with anybody. Remember, Shakur was about to fight Joe Cordina, who was moving up from 130 pounds. It was Joe Cordina, right, that he was scheduled to fight? Or maybe it was Lee Wood. Either way, it was going to be a 130-pounder coming up. Gervonta Davis, he's scheduled to fight Lamont Roach, scheduled for December. It looks like that date's been scrapped now and potentially moving to January. But Gervonta Davis, here we go again, fighting a smaller fighter who's a current champion in the 130-pound division for the same organization as Gervonta, the WBA. But Lamont Roach will be moving up to challenge Gervonta Davis for his title. Now, Lamont Roach can make history. He's a champ at 130, but that's the critique that Gervonta constantly takes. He does sell out arenas. He's a top dog at selling and marketability. He's a great fighter. He's a fan-friendly fighter. He's fun to watch. But he's not fighting the guys that we're mentioning here, the guys that are ready to challenge him, that are fighting at his division. Here he goes fighting another smaller fighter. It's not the first time. He did it with Hector Luis Garcia. He did it with lesser-known Mario Barrios, even though Gervonta's the one that moved up to challenge him. These are the fights that need to be made. For Abdullah Mason and Floyd Schofield, I think they need to get... There's a young fighter, a British fighter by the name of Sam Noakes, who's 15-0 with 14 knockouts, I believe. Heavy-handed British fighter. He's about to fight Ryan Walsh, I think, sometime in December. That's a fight to keep an eye on, because if Sam Noakes pulls off another knockout, he would be 16 with 15 knockouts. He's making a lot of noise, and he's going to be picking up those Commonwealth titles and a lot of the small version titles that they do out in Europe, and British titles. If he picks up those and he comes out with another emphatic win, which he's a favorite to win over Ryan Walsh, that's a very interesting fight to make between Sam Noakes and Abdullah Mason or Floyd Schofield, one of those, because those are the up-and-coming fighters that they're going to start eliminating one another to get into consideration and contendership. Who else do we have? Frank Martin seems like he's going to be going up to 140. So nothing there. You got Abdullayev. We can't forget about Abdullayev. Zaur Abdullayev, he has an only loss. His only loss of his career is at the hands of Devin Haney. He's got names like Jorge Linares. He's got names like Roger Gutierrez in his resume. He's aside from that loss to Devin Haney several years back, he's otherwise undefeated. Really strong fighter, come forward type fighter with heavy hands. You got Andy Cruz himself, who's campaigning in this division. That's the one that everybody wants to see between Keyshawn. That's a big money fight for him. What about George Kambosos? What about Maxie Hughes? These would be good tests. I would love to see George Kambosos, Floyd Schofield. That would be a perfect test, in my opinion, because I feel like Floyd Schofield is on a bit of a faster trajectory than that of Abdullah Mason, but I love the abilities of Abdullah Mason. I would love to see Abdullah Mason maybe take on a Giovanni Cabrera, who we saw against William Cepeda. Maybe take on a Diego Torres Nunez, whose sole loss is at the hands of Raymond Murataya. Or a Maxie Hughes. But those would be the step-ups for Abdullah Mason because he's got a good chunk of victories now. He's got 16 victories, I think, now with this past weekend. He's carving his way fairly fast, but he needs to start stepping up that competition. Maxie Hughes would be a good one for him. If he starts taking common opponents as the other top-ranked fighters, say like a Jeremiah Nakatila, those type of Endogeni, those type of fighters that Murataya already faced off against, that Shakur faced off against. So you start carving your path with opponents in common as these other fighters that are promoted with you, or Shakur, I guess, formerly promoted by Top Rank. You start taking some of these opponents in common. Maybe a Nicholas Walters and Abdullah Mason would be amazing now that he campaigns at lightweight. But those are the fights that they need to make to start making themselves viable for title contention. Floyd Schofield, George Kambosos would be an ideal fight for me. That would be a fan-friendly who's who, because it would be a crossroads type fight. For Floyd Schofield, should he win, he skyrockets into the top names. And you bet that he'll get a Keyshawn Davis or a William Cepeda, or if he doesn't get a title shot, he'll get a big money fight. And a big fight that will do wonders for his resume with a victory over George Kambosos. For George Kambosos, beating a young blue chip prospect like Floyd Schofield would make him viable and would legitimize his stance within the division into one more run for a title. Because he's eventually going to be moving out. He's going to be moved aside and room's going to be made for the younger fighters. So very interesting the way that Keyshawn Davis, with this victory and his coming out party in front of his home crowd in Norfolk, Virginia, sold out. He's got the promotional company behind him. He's got a great story, a great resume. He's marketable, great personality, very good on the mic, very humble as well. And just sold out in front of his crowd and performed beautifully against a high-level opponent. An opponent that just competed in an IBF Eliminator one fight ago and came up short by way of the judges. The opponent being Richardson Hitchens, who's going to get his shot at Liam Perro here in a few weeks' time. So Lemos going from an eliminator to take on another top prospect like Keyshawn Davis, and now he gets routed. That just shows the level that Keyshawn Davis is performing at right now. He looks better and better and better every single time out. Very interesting what Keyshawn Davis just did to shake up the lightweight division. He's calling out the top guys. Of course, everybody is. Floyd Schofield was as well just a week ago. He wants William Cepeda. He wants Shakur. He wants Tank. But they're saying he's not at their level. He needs another opponent. If they're saying Keyshawn's not at the level, I just found your route. Floyd Schofield, George Kambosos, Keyshawn Davis, Raymond Murataya, William Cepeda's already fighting Tevin Farmer. That's a good, high-level, high-pedigree fight against Tevin Farmer, not just a stay-busy fight, as he awaits for Shakur to return early next year in 2025. And if Shakur doesn't come back, then William Cepeda is number one across the board, where he should be able to negotiate with Tank or with Loma. Meanwhile, everybody else continues to carve their path and eliminate the other possible contenders and the other fighters making a name for themselves. Congratulations to the businessman Keyshawn Davis and his family, who also competed. His brothers also competed in the card. And you got to keep an eye out for Keyshawn Davis. If you've never watched him, you owe it to yourself as a boxing fan. So I'll leave you guys with that. That was a lot to cover, and hopefully you guys got a good wrap up as to what's going on within the lightweight division, because it's not just about Tank. It's not just about Shakur and Loma. Look at how everybody else is lining themselves up. Your top three names that you want to keep an eye out for right now to challenge Baranchik, Loma, Shakur, Gervonta are William Cepeda, Murataya, Keyshawn Davis, Andy Cruz. Andy Cruz performing at a little bit slower rate than Keyshawn Davis, so he's probably on the C level right now, whereas this other three are on the B level, and the top are the champs. And then you got Floyd Schofield and Abdullah Mason, who are carving their path. Kermel Moton is another young fighter, the young protege of Floyd Mayweather Jr. Kermel Moton is just ravaging through his opposition. He's going to be active again here in a few weeks' time. And just keep an eye out on these guys, because these blue chip prospects, these three, Mason, Schofield, Moton, they're quickly climbing up the ranks and can give headaches to any of those top names that I just mentioned for you. How quickly things change, and now we no longer talk about Ryan Garcia and Jojo Diaz and Cambosos and Haney, because either they migrated up or they're non-existent anymore. That's how quickly things change. So hopefully you got a good wrap up in this episode as to the current landscape of the lightweight division and how big, how meaningful this accomplishment was for Keyshawn Davis this past Friday night. So I'll leave you guys with that. I'll catch you guys on the next episode. Thank you guys again for the love, for the support, and check out the interviews that I managed to get in these past couple weeks from on the YouTube channel. And of course, Floyd Schofield being one of those guys. And then I got to talk to Gabriela Fundora, Sebastian Fundora, Alexis Rocha, who's challenging Curiel for another small version WBC title out in December, and he should be lining up with those small version titles. He already has one. He's going to pick up another one should he be victorious over the Cougar Curiel in December, and he'll be knocking on the door of either Mario Barrios or Boots Ennis. I think he's got a small version title challenging for the WBO, so it would be Brian Norman rather than Boots. But he talks to me about the four champs and how he sees them in the welterweight division at the moment. So check out those interviews, cool interviews that I managed to pick up for you guys. Hope you enjoy them. I got one with Gabe Rosado there that I picked up as well. He's going to be in action himself against BKFC star Luis Palomino and in like an exhibition professional type setting out in Miami. And pick up what he said about his potential, breaking news into a future fight with Edgar Berlanga as well. So check those interviews out on the YouTube portion of this channel. Thank you guys again for the support and for the downloads, for the continued love, and don't forget to spread the word and subscribe, follow, like, and I appreciate everything you guys are doing for to help the show grow. And we're gonna continue chipping away at this podcast game and at this boxing game. I'll check you guys out, and I'll catch you all on the next episode. Take care.